Hey everybody! Today I'm making a tutorial video. I've gotten a number of questions about how I make the little felted sculptures I use in my stop motion animation. I figured it's a good time as any to make a tutorial video on how to make the tiny warp trotters. I know it's a bit different than my usual content, but there's a short animation at the end, so you can look forward to that. So to start a felting project, three main things that you need is a needle felting foam, specialty felting needles, and a special kind of wool that's good for felting. For this project, I just used one coarse needle and one fine needle, which is all you really need to get started. I'll put some links in the description on what I use and where I get it if you guys are interested in like exactly what I use. To start making the body, you want to split the wool in half, but just by pulling apart. You can kind of gauge the size of the project by rolling the wool that you pull apart into a ball, and that'll roughly be the size of your product, though it will shrink a little bit with the felting. Here I take the coarser needle and you basically just stab through it. This is why the foam's really good, because you don't want to be hitting like your table or your fingers. So you want to have it kind of rolled into a ball and just stab it repeatedly. The shape of the warp trotter's body is pretty narrow at the back, wider where his front legs are, and then it comes to a point in the snout. So you might think of like a shape of like a whale or a fish, kind of almost like a football shape, I suppose. I'll put a picture up for reference too, because it's always good to have a reference picture, especially with 3D modeling, because it's easy to kind of forget what things look like, even though that sounds a little silly. You want to keep felting until it's pretty firm, like unable to be pulled apart very easily. You'll notice like when you start the project, the wool is very wispy. As you felt it together, it'll become just more fuzzy and like matted down. The coarse needle is very good for sort of muscling your project into what you want it to look like. Really defining like the points and like how narrow the back is. You can kind of concentrate needle pokes uh, where you want it to be more dense and more like to a point, and then kind of spread out the pokes when you want it just overall felted, like for the main body. You could see how much it really shrunk down the project from what I started with, which is pretty cool. Now, for the legs, you want to do the same thing where you split in half multiple times. To do it in half is very important here because you want the legs to be a uniform size so that it'll be well proportioned. You can rub them between your fingers to really get a sense of how big they'll be, and it kind of helps define their shape. You want to divide the wool by splitting it. You can cut it with scissors, but that will sometimes leave a blunt edge or a part that'll stick out in your project. So, in general, you always want to pull apart the wool. Now, you can see here I use the coarse needle to attach the legs to the body to start, and then once it's pretty well attached, I use the finer needle to really get all the little bits in. This helps there not to be like a hard line on your project, like a seam where the wool joins together. The finer needle helps to gently attach all the little pieces, where if you go in with the coarse needle, sometimes you'll have a little ruffled edge. The front legs of the warp trotter are a bit wider than the back legs. The warp trotters have really tiny back legs and really like wide arms. They're very like bulky. That's something to note when you're putting the legs together and attaching them, is that it's okay if they're a little oddly proportioned and it looks a little funny, because they are very like funny shaped. Now here we're going to add the top layer of the white on the back, and you can see I just split it until it's about the length of the warp trotter. It's a simple way to gauge how much you want it to be, maybe a little bit longer as you split the wool, so that you have a little extra edge to work with. Now, I use the finer needle to really get the defining edge of where the white and the black meet on the trotter. It kind of slopes down like on the middle, and then it goes up over the larger arm in the front is kind of a good way to look at it. And then it comes to like a point. I'll have a picture of the warp trotter so you can really see what I mean, because it's kind of hard to explain. But essentially, you just want to go around with your finer needle and really define where it meets. Don't worry too much about it being too fluffy on the top for now, because we'll come to that in a minute. Once you have the edge defined, you can use the coarser needle to really punch down the top. I start in the back here because again, the warp trotter is very bulky in the middle and very narrow in the back, so it helps to really felt together the part you want to be the smallest first, and that way if there's a little extra on the top, it'll just add to the shape. Now, the cool thing about needle felting is that the more you punch in one place, the further that particular section gets felted in. So for the top of the warp trotter, where there's a little deposit for the coin, because they're like a little piggy bank, that's what they're modeled after, you can really use your coarse needle to stab in this location many times to really get that little depression, which just again helps with the shape, and we'll add more color to it later. But you want to make sure you have that little divot, and then you can go in with your finer needle to continue felting the rest of the top. The coarse needle is really good for, again, muscling in your project the shape you want to go. So for the divot, it's really good to like really punch it in. But the finer needle will help just make sure the rest of your project doesn't get pushed in to the same degree. It'll felt it, but it won't move the project quite as much, which is, the main difference between the two needles. The coarse needle, really good for shaping big parts of your project. The finer needle for doing detail work and felting it together without really changing the shape of your project. You can push your project around with your fingers before stabbing your needle through if you find that the body of your trotter is getting too thin in some places, or you want them to be like more round like a ball. You can kind of smoosh them with your fingers and then continue felting. It'll help it hold a little bit better. Now, it's important to note you don't want to punch your needle all the way through your project, because then you'll have little white bits sticking out of the body of your trotter. If you're making a larger trotter than I am, you probably don't have to worry about it. And if you've already punched through a little bit, you might see what I mean about the little white spots, but don't worry about it too much. You can always try to poke them back through, or cover it with more black wool later. It's just, I mentioned a little too late here. Sorry about that. Now here we're adding the details to the top back of the trotter. You want to, again, split the wool many times, because you only need a little bit here. A little bit can go a long way with needle felting. You want a little bit of black, and you're going to just use your fine needle to put it in the little divot. And now you want to use the fine needle to start to really make sure you get it going in where you need it to go, and then really punch it down with your coarse needle so that it looks like a little hole in the top of his head. Now for the golden edges around the coin slot, you want to really split it down into very thin pieces and roll them between your fingers like a lot more than the legs, so that it gets really thin. You can kind of pull it and then rub it between your fingers. And here I use 2 pieces because it helps rather than going around in a circle. Just makes it a little easier and less likely that you're going to have like a weird oblong part on one side or have trouble meeting them together. So It just helps simplify things uh, and get the right amounts, and so it doesn't bunch up too much anywhere. And you want to just carefully use your fine needle to put that around the edge of the little coin slot. Now, the most defining feature of the trotters is probably the ears. So they take up like maybe the whole half of the body. So you want to make sure as you're pulling apart the wool that you get large enough pieces. I would say larger is better here. Like big ears are super cute. That being said, try to gauge. It's going to come all the way to the point to the nose and then all the way to the back of the coin slot. I use the fine needle here to join it to the head of the trotter. I would say the ears are joined halfway through the white. So a quarter of an inch from the dividing line between the black and the white. Again, the fine needle helps you really carefully attach where you want to go, and then the coarser needle really helps punch it in. As you can see, you can lay it down on the felting foam. That's really something the felting foam is really good for, is to lay the product down and just really go ham and punch it through. It can be a little tricky to do this part without punching all the way through your project. You want to really make sure you don't stab your needles all the way through too much. It does take a bit more time than the body because you have to kind of carefully angle it into itself, and then the ear comes up to a little point and then has a little bit of a wave, which you can go as detailed as you want with that. Even if you just make them simple triangles, they still look super cute. So don't worry about it too much. The big thing here is just making sure it becomes that sort of dense, felted uh, kind of material. It doesn't stay too wispy. It is possible to make the ears and then join them, but I find that that works really well for larger projects. But for smaller ones like this, it's easier to just put the ears on as you go. But there are many different methods out there of adding little limbs and whatnot. This is just my preferred technique. Using the coarse needle to go over it again and again to really get the shape you want is really important at this stage before we add any other colors to it. Next, we're going to add the golden part inside of the trotter's ear. And again, you want to split many times to get like just a tiny, tiny bit of color. It's easy to overestimate this. I would say you want just like a very little bit, very thin and wispy. It'll be more than you expect when you go to felt it in, especially on a little project. So just a tiny, tiny little bit of yellow. Now you want to be very careful when adding the yellow that you don't punch the color straight through the ear. You want to kind of go parallel or angle your needle in towards the body as opposed to straight through the ear. In thinner areas, it can be a bit tricky when adding color. So you really want to angle it down into the body from many angles. So you'll see I'll go like, top down into the body and then like from the tip of the ear, really a sharp angle into the side and like along the edge to really define uh, where it's going. It can be a bit tricky at first, so don't worry too much if at first you poke a lot through. You can always put a very thin layer of white over the back of the ear. I find that a little bit of white poking through to the yellow is not as noticeable as the yellow poking through the back of the ear. But these are very small, very tiny trotters anyways, so don't worry too much about mistakes. It can be very tricky to work on a small scale anyways. So definitely using the finer needle here to clean up the edges and really make sure the yellow section is how you would like it. It probably won't look exactly like the real trotters because they have like very thin, very luxurious. The gold fills up the whole inside of the ear, but we're going for a very cute little fuzzy trotter with thick, big ears. So uh, don't worry about it too much. Now, here is a section I figured I'd include where you can just do little touch ups. So take really thin, wispy pieces of wool, like very, very tiny amounts, to touch up your project where the colors might not be as dense as you'd like here at the tip of the nose. Um, I didn't have quite as much white wool as I would like, and the black was showing through the face a little bit. So you just take a very thin piece of white wool in this case and use the fine needle to make sure there's no hard edge and just add a little bit more color to make it a little more vibrant and just sharpen up the white color. This is where you could add it, like if you had some white poke through the belly, you could add a little bit of black. Make sure you don't punch it all the way through the second time through to the top. But you can just use like tiny bits of wool to really clean up your lines or your details and whatnot. But that's about the whole tutorial I've got for you. This trotter was a little bit bigger than trotters I made in the past for the sake of the video. You can make them as tiny as you can or as large as you'd like. I hope this was helpful. I know this is different, very different than my usual kind of content, a voice reveal and all that. But please let me know if you'd like to see more of this. I'm happy to do other tutorials in the future if people are interested. Thank you so much for watching, and good luck making your little trotters. Bye bye.